Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. Right, I have met a number of you over the course of last night and today, and everyone keeps saying, Anastasia's built you up so much. Feels like this pressure's been ramping up. I hope I don't disappoint, but what I'm going to talk to you about over the next 45 minutes or so, and there will be time for some questions at the end, so if you have any, keep hold of them for now. I'm going to talk to you about how, in my world of Formula One, we do what I believe to be an excellent job of building high-performing teams, of operating at an extremely high level to deliver results in a really competitive environment. And it may be easy to sort of think about my world and think that it's a million miles away from what you guys do. But the reality is, and I hope you'll see this as we go through this session, the reality is there are so many similarities. You know, I've had a number of conversations and meetings in the build-up to this event. Every time I've had one, every time I've jumped on a call, it's become clearer and clearer that you're all facing exactly the same challenges that we face in Formula One. And I believe we've learnt and found ways to develop systems and tools and processes that enable us to come out of the other side of those challenges really strongly. So I'm going to try and share some of those with you. This looks like it's a shameless plug for my book, and it is. But it's not just that. This is my first book, and the quote on the front cover there from one of my drivers when I first joined the team, David Coulthard, talks about how important the people behind the scenes are to delivering this great result. We're so focused in Formula One on the drivers. They're, of course, the stars of the show, rightly so, but there's so much attention and focus on those guys. When they win a race, they're the ones on the podium spraying the champagne. They're the ones that take the championship accolades that go alongside their names. But none of them have ever won a world championship or can ever even aspire to winning a world title without the help and support of a huge number of people working away behind the scenes. And as I go through my story this morning, I want you to think about you as those people, because it's exactly the same. Nothing happens in your world without all of you guys. Without you guys laying the foundations, being the team behind the scenes that deliver an end product or an end service, deliver hopefully something excellent at the end of it. And I'm going to talk to you about my version of that story. So before we start, who in the room is a Formula One fan? Let's have a quick show of hands. Who follows the sport? Oh, that's so easy, because I can tell the rest of you absolutely anything, and you just have to believe me. Well, I'm hoping that by the end of this, if nothing else, you'll be intrigued by Formula One. And you are here in Montreal at the perfect time to start learning about a little bit more about what goes on behind the scenes. It's a fascinating world, an incredible sport, but it's also a business, just like any other. There are 10 teams in this sport at the moment, 10 teams competing on track. They are also businesses that have the same challenges and processes as every other business in the world. They're all fighting the same kind of problems, and I'm going to talk to you about how we solve some of those, as I said. So let's start by looking at the way a Formula One team's made up. This is my old team, McLaren. Right now in Formula One, McLaren are the current world champions. They won the Constructors, the Teams World Championship last year. This is the moment that happened at the celebration at the end of the final race last year, where after many years of not winning, McLaren found their way back to the top. Now, I was at the team a number of years ago where we were in a successful period. We were winning races, and as I'm going to go and explain to you, we also won a world championship. It's one of the most incredible feelings. I can't even really find the words to describe it. It's an incredible thing that happens, an indescribably difficult thing to achieve. And it only happens with this huge number of people working away, working together in this perfect sort of synchronicity, trusting each other with these incredible bonds between each other, working together to create the excellence in a world, by the way, where everybody is operating at an incredibly high level to try and be the best in that industry. McLaren are currently the ones that have that accolade. So this is the race team. These are the people that travel the world to every Grand Prix. They're here in Montreal this week, of course. There's only around about 120 people that travel to every Grand Prix. But the reality is that a Formula One team is actually made up of a lot more than that. A Formula One team, the business of a Formula One team, is around 1,500 people at the bigger teams. All there to design, manufacture, build and operate and then develop these two Formula One cars that are then on the grid on a Sunday afternoon competing in this one of the world's biggest sporting events. So a huge number of people, and I know this is another similarity to some of the worlds that you guys work in, a huge number of people at our team are based in a factory in the UK, whereas another section of the team are constantly on the road, traveling the world, going from racetrack to racetrack. So there's a disconnect, or there can be a disconnect between that group and the factory-based group. And that's the way of the world today, right? We're often working remotely, we're disconnected physically from a lot of people, which is why this particular conference is such an amazing opportunity for you guys to come together to meet the people that you talk to on a daily basis, that you get your emails from and you jump on Zoom calls for. It's an incredibly powerful feeling to know who it is you're working with. And the more connections you build over the course of this week, and I'm sure you have, but the more connections you build, the stronger those connections become, the better the trust will be between you, the better the teamwork over time will become. And teamwork, as I'm going to go on and explain, is the biggest single key to us developing a high-performing and then a winning team. So this is the race team. If we go a little bit deeper into what goes into a Formula One team, though, this is the pit stop crew. So I was part of the pit stop crew for the full 10 years that I was at McLaren, and over time I grew into roles where I ended up leading the pit stop crew. This is a smaller section from within that group that I just showed you, around 20 or so people who come together maybe 3, 4 or 5 times during a Grand Prix to change the wheels and tyres in the staggering speeds that those of you who do follow the sport will be familiar with. They're doing it under immense pressure, though, because the stakes are high, the time pressure is real, and there are other teams doing the same thing at the same time, and whoever gets out of that pit lane first has the best opportunity at, of course, winning a Grand Prix. And that's big in our world. Those are points that mean big prizes that go on to determine who becomes world champions at the end. These things matter. Now I'm going to go into a lot more depth about pit stops, because that was my area of expertise, my speciality, if you like. And I think it's a really good analogy for so many of the things that we all do on our daily basis. It's almost like a small microcosm of the team, if you like, on a smaller level. So we'll go into more depth there. But this is the team side of things. Now, even if you're not necessarily a big Formula One fan, as I saw many of you aren't yet, if we go even deeper, the drivers, as I said at the top, the drivers are the stars of the show. Most of you, I'm sure, will at least recognize this guy on the left there. It's a much younger picture of me, but also a much younger picture of Lewis Hamilton. Everybody must know Lewis Hamilton, or at the very least have heard of Lewis. Lewis is statistically the greatest driver that's ever graced our sport. He's a 7-time world champion. He's won more races than anybody else in the history of Formula One. An incredible athlete, an incredible competitor. But this picture was taken before Lewis actually got into Formula One. So this is a picture of me working at McLaren when Lewis was racing in the junior categories. So one lower rank, one level down from Formula One, if you like, Formula 2. Lewis was driving in that, hoping, of course, to one day get his chance to work in Formula One. And he wandered down the pit lane at this particular race, and as I was working on the car and everyone else had gone to dinner that particular Friday evening, Lewis wandered in and started asking me questions about our Formula One car. Now, what was interesting was, yes, he was intrigued about this car that he hopefully one day was going to get behind the wheel of, but he was asking me questions in more detail than any of my actual Formula One drivers had ever asked me before. He was asking me things like, not just what happens when this button is pressed on the steering, what does it do? He wanted to know that, but he wanted to know how it did it. He wanted to know the intricacies of, when I press this button on the steering wheel, what happens, where's the signal go? Through this black box, what's happening there? And when it then feeds on to the rear of the car, what does it change? How does it change the dynamics of the car? What's it feel like when that happens? He wanted to know in more depth than I've ever had to explain to anybody how every one of these intricate technicalities worked on our car. And at the time I found it intriguing, at least, because my own Formula One drivers were never that interested. They were mostly like you and I with an iPhone. We want it to work, but we don't really care how. That's what most Formula One drivers are like. But Lewis stood out to me, even back then, as being a little bit different. Now, what was fascinating was that 1 year after that picture was taken, Lewis did get the drive at McLaren. He became McLaren's Formula One driver. This young rookie that no one had even heard of really back then, with a huge amount of potential in front of him. In fact, the potential when Lewis turned up in this sport was so great that I remember people talking about him when he was first announced as the same kind of, in the same breath as people like Tiger Woods. He could be as big as Tiger Woods, I remember people saying back then, and no one knew who he was. As big as Tiger Woods. As it turned out, Lewis ended up being a better driver than Tiger Woods. Thank you, that's the only joke, so I appreciate that. But my point that I'm going to go on to make is that just 2 years after he eventually got that drive, his big break, he got his dream come true, and that drive in Formula One with McLaren, he became world champion. Now that was an unprecedented rise to success that no one has done before, no one's done since. Just 2 years. And there is undoubtedly, in my mind, a link between the level of detail that he was going to on that moment in that picture and the level of success that he's gone on to have. He wanted to try and gather as much information as he possibly could and go to great lengths to get that information because he knew that if that opportunity came, and he was behind the wheel of a Formula One car, going wheel to wheel with some of the best drivers in the world, in the heat of battle, he knew a little bit more about the tools that he had underneath him, a little bit more about what he had available to him to fight that battle. And even though that might make the smallest of difference, it will still make a difference. And when he's going wheel to wheel, he knows exactly what he has available to try and give him some kind of very small advantage. And that's what Formula One is all about, small advantages. It is very rare that anyone in this sport comes up with some magic silver bullet of an idea that catapults them from the back to the front. We all wish we could do that. I'm sure we all wish that in all industries. The reality, and much more common, is that we've just got to be excellent at every single thing that we do, improving everything by small amounts. And over time, if we do that consistently, we end up with staggeringly good results. Lewis is the perfect example of that. His work ethic is second to none. I've never seen a Formula One driver work as hard as him, be as dedicated as him. He's had a long career and is still going now, and it's no surprise to me. He works hard both technically, with the team, on himself in terms of his physical training and dedication, and he's into his 40s now, and he's still going strong. It's no coincidence. So that sets up what a Formula One team looks like, from the drivers to the team to the pit stop crew and beyond. And what I want to talk to you really about, because it was my area of expertise, as I said, is this idea of pit stops, being a real good analogy for a lot of the topics that I think Formula One does incredibly well. So I said earlier on, we've got 10 teams in Formula One right now. They all have the same kind of setup, right? 2 drivers, 2 cars, a pit stop crew, maybe 120 or so people that travel around the world to each race, and even more than that, back at their factories, wherever they are around the world. We have to find ways to bring all of those people together, to create the perfect teamwork. And I'm going to talk to you about some ideas that I think we do very well that really highlight that. So specifically, I'm going to focus on pit stops. A few years ago, when I first got my dream job in Formula One, and I dreamt of getting there for years, I'd worked my way up the sort of motorsport ladder, if you like. And when I was 22, that dream came true. I got my big break at McLaren, and I got put onto the race team. Now, part of being on the race team in a Formula One team comes with the responsibility of being part of a pit stop crew. And actually, the pit stops were the thing that had fascinated me for years in trying to get there. That was the reason that I wanted to get into a Formula One team. I wanted to be part of a pit stop crew. It looked like it was an amazingly spectacular thing. It was a dynamic thing. It looked glitzy and glamorous. It looked amazing. I wanted to be part of that. Now, when I got there as this young 22-year-old with 0 experience, and of course I was nervous, when I got sent out to my first ever race, which is the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, the team manager gave me a job in the pit stop, which doesn't even happen very often, right? So I'm going to tell you about my first ever pit stop to set the scene of what pit stops were like back then, before I then go on to tell you the process through which we've managed to iterate and improve pit stops to what they are today. And at the end of all that, I'm going to show you a video of basically where we got to. And it's impressive. I still find it mind-blowingly impressive what a Formula One pit stop looks like today. But this is where it all started, right? So all those years ago, I'm 22, I get sent out to Australia, and we used to treat pit stops very differently back then. The job that the team manager gave me was the job of putting on the spare nose cone should the driver have an accident and knock off the first one. So that's everything from that number 4 at the top of your picture, everything forward, the nose cone and the front wing, that's one unit. My role was to replace that if the driver has an accident and knocks it off in the race. So it's incredibly rare, right? That doesn't happen very often. And I was really pleased that was rare because all of a sudden I was terrified. Having dreamt of this for years, I was now really quite scared. Now, to set the scene of how important we used to treat pit stops back then, again, very different to today, we practiced once a week. Now, this is what happens, right? On a Wednesday, we'd push the car out into the pit lane, somebody would roll the car in and out of the pit stop box, and it would roll in, it would stop on the marks in this pit stop box, and we'd all burst into action. And this is what happens. Someone takes off that broken nose cone, gets rid of it. I come in with a new one, that whole big piece of kit, a nose cone, huge front wing. I have to swing it into position, line it up on 4 pins on the front of the car, where a couple of guys then do up the catches to lock it in place. And I then have to leap out the way so the front jack man can get in behind me to then lower the car back down onto the floor. That's how it should happen. On this particular day, it did not look anything like that, I can assure you. Anything that could have gone wrong went wrong. It was a horrible experience. I remember tripping over with this great big bit of kit in my hands, clattering into the guy taking the first nose cone off. When I finally did get to the car, I was missing these 4 pins regularly. Such a panic and state of panic that I was in. I was trying to jam the nose on and missing the pins. A couple of times I hit the 4 pins, but then let go of it before the catches were done up, and it still just fell on the floor. Anything that could have gone wrong went wrong. It was a horrible, horrible disaster. And in fact, once I remember hitting these pins perfectly, the guys did the catches up, and I stood back to admire my own work for so long that still the front jack man couldn't get anywhere near the car, and it was still a disaster. So at the end of that practice, I mean, my heart was pounding. I was in such a state of panic. I ran into the garage to find the team manager, all out of breath, and I said, "Oh, did you see that? That was a disaster." I said, "If that happens on Sunday, I mean, our race is going to be ruined." And he went, Mark, he said, "Calm down." He said, "There's 2 things to remember here." He said, "First of all, it's highly unlikely it's going to happen." And you can see where I'm going to go with this, can't you? He said, "Secondly, if it does happen, well, it means obviously the driver must have had an accident to damage the nose cone, so his race is already ruined." He said, "Don't worry about it, it'll be fine." Well, I worried about nothing else. I got to Saturday night, the night before the Grand Prix, and I promise you, I did not sleep a wink. I was up all night long, imagining what I was convinced was this impending disaster that was about to unfold in front of the world, by the way, on Sunday afternoon. So I got to Sunday, race day, having not slept. I was so tired, but adrenaline fueled me and got me through. I got to Sunday afternoon, and then what happens is we go onto the grid in Melbourne, onto the grid ahead of the race start. Now, my job on that day, part of my role, was to strap my driver, who was Kimi Räikkönen, Finnish racing driver. I strapped him into the car, and I have to give him his gloves, pop his steering wheel on, and then I wish him luck. And at that point, I then have to leave the grid, along with everyone else from all the other teams, and find my way all the way back from the grid back to the pit lane garages to be ready in case of an early pit stop. Now, while we're doing that, the cars leave the grid and go off to do one slow lap called the formation lap or the green flag lap, where they're warming up their tyres and brakes, getting ready for the actual race start. Now, there's a melee of people, hundreds of people trying to get off the grid. There's a little bottleneck in Melbourne where you've got to go through this little gate, so it's chaos trying to get off there, and everyone's desperate to get back to the pit lane. And in Melbourne, it's a long way back to the pit lane, but you know, this is my first ever Grand Prix, right? I cannot be late for my first pit stop should it happen. So I have got my elbows out, I'm trying to fight my way through a crowd. I am desperate to get back there. I can't see anything that's going on with the cars. They launch off the line to go and do their green flag lap, so you hear it, and then they disappear off into the distance as they're weaving around to warm up tyres and whatever. I don't know, I can't see any of that. You just hear this pack of cars disappearing. And then eventually, you hear 20 cars forming their way back up onto the grid. And at that point, I'm still nowhere near the the McLaren garages back in the pit lane. I've still got a long way to go, and I'm just starting to panic about the fact that I'm convinced there's going to be some sort of pit stop here, and I'm going to be late. I'm not going to be there. Day one. So I'm now sprinting as fast as I can, fighting my way through this crowd. I'm dropping tools and equipment and all sorts on the way, but that didn't matter. I just had to get there. And then you hear these 20 cars, right, launch on the, form up on the grid. They all start bouncing the engines off the rev limiter. And back then, by the way, the sound of a Formula One car was deafening. I mean, a high-pitched scream. They used to rev to 21,000 RPM. You felt that noise as opposed to just hearing it. And as I'm trying to make my way back towards the garages, I hear, in fact, I feel the fact that the race has started. 20 cars launch off the line. It's like thunder. It rattles your bones. And I am still not back at the pit lane. So now I am sprinting for my life as fast as I possibly can, and this race has literally just started. And I reckon about 3 seconds after the lights had gone out and the race had launched, had started, the little earpiece in my ear burst into life. And the team manager comes on. He says, guys, Kimmy's had an accident in turn 1. He's knocked his nose cone off, and and he's on his way in for a pit stop. And my whole world just stopped. I went into like headless chicken mode. I sprinted back to this McLaren garage. Now, one thing I haven't told you there, McLaren, in amongst all of the other teams in Formula One, McLaren stands out for its attention to detail. It was our USP, still is today. The factory was just immaculate. The pit lane garage, exactly the same. It all stemmed from our boss, a CEO called Ron Dennis, who had the most incredible attention to detail. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, Ron Dennis has the gravel on his own driveway collected up at regular intervals to be cleaned before it's put back down again. Not even joking. So that's the level that we're talking about. It's immaculate always. The McLaren garage was sort of spotless, beautifully presented, chairs laid out in this immaculate fashion all times. Everything's just perfect all of the time. Now, when I got this radio message to say, right, Kimmy's coming in for a pit stop and it's a nose change, none of that mattered. I ran back to McLaren's garage, threw the equipment I had into the garage. The chairs went scattering, made an almighty mess. Ron Dennis, by the way, was still sat in one of those chairs watching the race start unfold on the monitor. And he must have looked out thinking, who the hell is that? Who's this new young kid that I've never met before? I didn't have time to worry about any of that stuff, right? That didn't matter to me. Only one thing mattered, and that was being ready for when this car arrived in the pit lane. So I ran around, threw the equipment down, picked up my pit stop balaclava. So I had a fireproof balaclava, which is like a bank robber's balaclava, with 2 little eye holes in it. But I pulled it on so quickly that I got it all skew-if, and I could only just about see out of one eye. That's how it had to stay. I ran out and grabbed the nose cone for Kimmy's car, picked it up and ran out into the middle of the pit lane and stood at the front of the pit lane box. And I was shaking like a leaf, honestly. My heart was pounding out of my chest. The sweat was running into my eyes. They were stinging. I could hardly see anything. I was imagining all my friends and family back home that I told about my amazing new job, all watching on TV as I destroyed McLaren's afternoon. I was imagining the back pages of tomorrow's newspaper with a picture of me and a headline that said, McLaren disaster. None of these things were going to happen, right? But that's what was going through my head. Because I was out there, I suddenly turned around with holding this gear with all my gear on, when I realized that all of my colleagues were still in the garage, clearing up the mess that I just made and taking their time to get themselves ready. I was out there all by myself. I looked in there thinking, what am I doing? I can't go back in now, because they knew that with Kimmy, with his broken car, he had to limp his way around an entire lap to get back to us in the pit lane. And that was going to take about a minute and a half. A minute and a half in Formula One terms is a lifetime, right? I can't go back into the garage now, so I'm stuck out there on my own with all this gear, holding this great big bit of kit. And because of that, there's now a TV cameraman who's realised we're about to do a pit stop. And I'm not kidding, he's that close. And I know that on the other end of that tiny little lens, 200 million people, in my mind, were all just staring at me for that entire minute and a half. Obviously, that's not what was happening, because that would have made terrible television, but that's what was going on in my head. There were all these things racing through my mind to put me off what was actually a really simple job. Because the truth is, This is the job, right? You pick up the nose cone, you walk over to the front of the car, you pop it onto a couple of pins, and then you walk away. It's that simple. But on that day, it became the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my entire life. After what felt like forever, my colleagues eventually came out and joined me around the pit stop box, and Kimmy appears at the far end of the pit lane. Now, he has to come down the pit lane towards us at the pit lane speed limit, which back then was 70 miles an hour, 120 kilometers an hour. I always say to people, that's like standing in the fast lane of a motorway, hoping that at the very last second, he's going to stop there. It's terrifying. But even worse than that, right? The brakes on a Formula One car are so good that just 15 meters away from you, he's still doing 70 miles an hour. It's the scariest thing I've ever had to do in my life, still to this day. Anyway, as we all formed up, Kimmy appears, he comes down the pit lane, he screeches to a halt, stops perfectly on the marks, nailed it, and everyone bursts into action. So someone takes off the broken nose cone, I come in with this great big bit of kit, swing it into a position, didn't trip over, didn't hit anybody, hit these 4 pins perfectly. And the guys did the catches up, and I nailed it. I leapt out of the way. It was perfect. I mean, by far, the best pit stop I'd done in my very short career at that point. I never nailed one like that. It was amazing. I bounded off back into the McLaren garage, pulled my balaclava off. The grin on my face must have been ridiculous. And I was just leaping around like a kid at Christmas, so happy, so relieved. And then what happened was I realized as I turned round, the car was still stationary out in the pit lane. And it should have long gone back into the race. And what I'd missed in my own sort of selfish sense of euphoria as I leapt around the garage like an idiot was that this radio traffic had been going on between Kimmy in the car and the guys on the pit wall, where Kimmy had said when he'd gone off and had his accident and broken the front wing, he'd got into a gravel trap, and a tiny piece of gravel, a tiny stone, had leapt up in the air and gone down between his back and the seat of the car. And you're so tightly strapped in as a Formula One driver that, first of all, he can't reach to get that out himself. And second, it's too painful to just leave in there and carry on. So this what must have looked like a hilarious scene ensued, where there's about 15 McLaren mechanics all clambering over the car with their hand down Kimmy's back in the middle of a Grand Prix, trying to find a stone no bigger than the size of a pea. It went on forever, right? Somebody eventually found this thing, threw it away, and Kimmy angrily screeched off back down the pit lane into the race. But by that point, and remember, I think I said to you earlier, McLaren's pit stops were the fastest. We were the class-leading pit stop crew at the time, right? It used to take us 4 seconds to change the 4 wheels and tyres on a car, and that was as quick as anyone could do this job. Right, we were the guys that had a target on our back, as everyone was chasing that 4-second time barrier from us, and we were the leading team with that. This pit stop, about a minute and a half. It might have been McLaren's worst pit stop in their entire history, I have no idea. But when these now very angry and grumpy mechanics came trudging back into the garage, as Kimmy had left, this guy is just leaping around the garage wanting to high-five everybody, because my little bit had gone really well. And it completely changed my outlook on this process of a pit stop from that day forward, in that my part in that process was a tiny little part. You know, it was an important part. I could have easily made that whole pit stop a total disaster all by myself on that day, and luckily I didn't. But I could never make it the perfect pit stop by myself either. There is no way that that's possible. There's no way any one individual can make the perfect pit stop happen by themselves. So clearly the only way we can ever do that is by working together as a team. It's by bringing all of the expertise and the experience together. Everybody working together, trusting each other, building the right processes, the right training and practice regimes. All of this stuff has to come together at exactly the right moment under massive pressure to be able to deliver the perfect pit stop. So when we fast forward a few years, and so that was me setting up what pit stops used to be like. If I fast forward a few years and we get to a point where I'm now leading the pit stop crew and we get this mandate from Ron Dennis, our CEO, to go ahead and try and be better, to find ways to be better at pit stops. You can understand, and I'm sure many of us can relate to this, there was a part of our crew, part of our team that took that mandate and said, well, why do we need to be better? We're already the best at these pit stops. McLaren were the class-leading pit stop crew. We were doing things incredibly well, and at the time, nobody could beat us. So why do we want to go and change things? And what Ron's view was, and this is a view held right across our sport, it's a saying that we have in Formula One, and it's so true, that if you stand still in Formula One, very quickly you get left behind because the rate of progress is so fast in this competitive environment. It's as competitive in the pit stops as it is on the racetrack with the car. It's exactly the same in the business sense as well. The whole industry moves incredibly quickly. So when Ron turns around, he says, look, guys, we need to find a way to be better at pit stops. Some people's reaction was, well, why? And when Ron gathered us together to deliver this message in a meeting a little bit like this, we're all sat around on tables, and he said to us, and the pit stop crew was sat around a table at the front, and he said, guys, I know we're doing the best. We're doing a very good job. We are the best at this particular part of our process. But I want you to go away and find new ways of doing things that make us better. And he looked at the table with the pit stop crew. And when he got this reaction of, well, what are you talking about? Why do we need to go and change something? His response to that was a real game changer for me, because from a business perspective, from a team perspective, the CEO of our company, Ron Dennis, turned around and he said, look, guys, I can't tell you how to be better at pit stops. He said, the reality is I run this company, I'm the CEO, I like to think I'm really good at it. He said, but I've never done a pit stop. The only people who are the most experienced in this entire room, of brilliant elite level people in every area, by the way, the people who are most experienced at pit stops are you guys, the pit stop crew. He said, I want you to tell us as a team, as a company, what do you need? How can we make this better? What can we do? What can we give you? How can we enable you to go away with a blank sheet of paper and dream up new ways of doing things that can improve, even by the smallest amount, this process that we call a pit stop that can shape the outcome of our races. These big global sporting events can be flipped on their head by a good or a bad pit stop. He said, I want you guys to tell us what it is you need from us, from a business, to help you be better. And this idea that suddenly the pit stop crew, me and my colleagues, were suddenly being valued by the CEO of this big organization, were having some importance put on the experience that we had as a team, was empowering. It was uplifting. It allowed us to puff our chests out a little bit. And we looked around this room of incredible people. People like Ron Dennis, inspiring. Adrian Newey, one of the greatest designers in Formula One history, sat on a table behind me. And I looked around the room and I thought, he's right. These are amazing people in every single area of what we do as a business. But none of them have more experience on the ground in this particular facet of what we do, pit stops. None of them have more experience than me and the people around my table. And in those moments when we suddenly felt this empowering feeling, like we were given the responsibility, we were being trusted to shape the way this process looked, we did start to question around ourselves, could we do this? Could we go better than 4 seconds? Our chests did puff out a little bit. And we're a competitive group of people, so we decided to take this challenge on. And we went away and we broke down the process of a pit stop. A process, as I said, that took 4 seconds to change 4 wheels and tyres. That is staggeringly quick. To change 4 wheels and tyres in 4 seconds is unbelievably fast. But could we do it any better? We were this competitive group. We broke down the process into its tiny little fragments, small areas, and we went away and we tried to understand if there was anything, even the tiny things, that we could do better. This was about coming up with new ideas, things that we'd never done before, thinking outside the box. We were encouraged by Ron Dennis to think outside the box. This was an un-Ron Dennis kind of thing to do. He was so meticulous in his detail, but this was about coming up with an idea that no one else had before, about being innovative. And we had the freedom to go and find those ideas. And what Ron said to us was, look, when you take these brave and bold decisions, when you think outside the box, you take risks, some of them are going to end in failure. Some of them will not work. That's the very nature of a risk. But he said if you then delve into those failures in the same level of attention to detail that we give everything in our organization, maybe from those failures is where you'll find your biggest opportunity. The point was, he said, don't stop at your failure. Don't stop when something doesn't work. It's one of the biggest mistakes people who are trying to be innovative as a business do. They try something, it doesn't work, they go back to the old way. That first failure is simply a stepping stone on the way to the success that you're chasing. If you're heading in a direction that you believe in, that you've had an idea that, yes, no one's done it before, that's the nature of innovation. It doesn't mean it's always going to work first time around. But the failures are one of the most important learning points in that process. The feedback, the data, the understanding we get from when things don't initially work out can be crucial. And we were encouraged to think along these lines. So we went away and we started to break down this process of a pit stop. I'm going to tell you some of the things that we did that managed to iterate and improve on this, what was a 4-second event. And in a moment, I'm going to show you this video of basically where this process got us to. But one of the first things that we had to change, just from the story I've just told you very clearly, is the training regime. Because training once a week was just way too hit and miss. The fact that I managed to get through that first pit stop was kind of just luck. There was no mechanism to make me ready. Certainly not to cope with the pressure that I've tried to describe to you earlier on. There was no means to prepare us fully for that. And if we don't prepare fully, we leave things to chance. And when you leave things to chance, you have a much higher risk of things going wrong. And if the people around you, your competitors, are not leaving things to chance, if they're better prepared than you are, well, they will have a much higher chance of succeeding. And in a world of competitive racing, where competition is everything, we can't afford to leave too much to chance. So it was about going back and preparing. Now we train every single day. Thousands and thousands of pit stop practices over the course of a season. It's to commit the process to muscle memory so that we don't need to think about it very much. It's just in there. It's buried in there. We know exactly what we're going to do. But also, sometimes things go wrong. It's inevitable that no matter what you're preparing for, something will go wrong at some point. If we're going to do 100 live pit stops in Grand Prix over a season, it's almost unthinkable that every single one of those will go perfectly without any hitch. Like, we mitigate against that by preparing and practicing, we do whatever we can, but it's highly likely that something, even something beyond our control, will have a knock-on consequence to compromising that pit stop. So the way we prepare for that is we prepare for failures, in which most people think that's a crazy thing to do. Why aren't you just preparing for the perfect pit stops, drilling that into everybody so that you're ready in a frame of mind where you think everything's going to go right, thinking positively? It's not about that. We do all of those things, but we're also aware that there will be an occasion when something goes wrong. And if we leave that occasion to chance, we will be hampered in a much greater respect in terms of our overall outcome. So we prepare for the most common failure modes. And we can all do this in our worlds. We know that there is a risk that the car might come in with a puncture, for example. It might be through no fault of our own. Somebody might have made contact with our car on racetrack. It'll come in with a puncture. And when that happens, the front of the car might be sort of squat down on one side, meaning we can't get the front jack under the wing. Well, what do? We worked with psychologists to understand how we make decisions in the team. And one of the things that came out of that is that we now understand fully that, and it's obvious when you think about it, but humans make pretty terrible decisions when you're under massive pressure. Now, a Formula One pit stop is a high-pressure environment anyway. But when something goes wrong in that high-pressure environment, that pressure spikes up to unimaginable levels in the moment. If you have to make a decision in that moment, there's a very high chance you may not make a good one. You're not thinking clearly. No matter how well prepared you are, you're not thinking as clearly as you otherwise might be. So what we do is we make the decisions about those moments in the clarity of our practice, in the calm moments long before a race weekend ever happens. We think about that tyre coming in with a puncture, for example, and we throw those into our pit stop practices randomly over the course of a season, over and over again. So we have a procedure to deal with that particular failure mode. Same thing if a front jack fails or if a wheel gun fails. These are things that we desperately try not to have happen, but we know they could. We prepare for them all of the time. So it means that we don't have to make a decision when the pressure ramps up in that moment because we've already made the decision and we just kick into our plan B that's drilled into us as much as the perfect pit stop is. It leaves nothing to chance. So we worked with these psychologists to help us to prepare for dealing with pressure, to understand how as an individual we can cope with that, we can prepare for it, we can prepare in the less pressurized moments for when the big, highly pressurized moments come along. And we all do that. We can all do that. One of the things that a psychologist said to me was a great way to do this is to come up with a technique, and for us it was sort of breathing techniques, very short breathing techniques, but practice them in the moments on your way to work, when someone cuts you up in traffic, or when the kids are playing up in the morning trying to get them ready for school. Simple moments that happen all of the time that can produce an element of high pressure or high stress. When those moments happen, you kick into this procedure that you're working on. It might be a short 3-second deep breath, or whatever you decide it's going to be. Work on it in those moments, and when the big moment happens, on a really high pressure, stressful day, you're a little bit closer to being prepared. You're a little bit calmer, a little bit more relaxed. You're not going to see the same negative impact as you otherwise would if you weren't prepared. It's all about preparation. This is literally the key to the best outcomes coming your way. So as well as psychologists and team psychologists, we used nutritionalists and physical therapists. We created training regimes, physical training, as well as just the pit stops. So everyone's fit and healthy, mitigating against things like injuries and sickness, because all of those things will have a knock-on impact to your end performance. Someone gets sick, you've got to replace them. That's a knock-on effect to continuity in the team. There's obvious consequences there. So looking after people's general health and well-being became a performance metric for us. Nutrition. I remember somebody coming to me back in the day and saying, we've got a nutritionalist on board and they're preparing a meal plan for you guys over the course of a weekend. And my first reaction to that was, what are you talking about? Someone's going to tell me what to have for breakfast on a Sunday morning and you think that's going to impact my pit stop performance on a Sunday afternoon. That's ridiculous. But the reality is, it's not really about what I had for breakfast. The truth of this is about preparation. Because I know that during a Grand Prix, we might be running second in a race. And we might be chasing down the guy in first, right? And towards the end of that Grand Prix, both cars will need to come into the pits to get fresh tyres to get to the end of the race. Now, when that happens, we're going to burst out of the pit lane, but so are another crew of guys 20 metres further along the pit lane to do exactly the same thing as us at exactly the same time. And whoever gets out of that pit lane first or second, that shapes the race outcome. When we burst out of that pit lane, though, we're going to burst out with an air of confidence, knowing there is no way in the world they are looking at nutrition in terms of their preparation. Because it was so ridiculous, like no one was. So there's no way they are, right? It doesn't really matter what I ate for breakfast, but knowing that can give me a little psychological advantage, an air of confidence where I do burst out of the garage with my chest puffed out. And that confidence in our pit stops might translate into a few hundredths or a tenth of a second more. Doesn't sound like much, but it can be the difference. So these little tiny details could be the difference between us getting out of the pit lane first or second. And that can change the outcome of a race, which of course can go on to change the outcome of world championships. These little details matter. So all of these little things became part of our process. The feedback loops we created from all of these little process streams were massive, creating data sets, both from sensors that we put on the car, as well as the human beings, but also the feedback that we got from those people. The most important people to giving feedback in any situation are the people right at the heart of that situation. You know, people always say to me when there's a bad pit stop that happens on a Grand Prix somewhere, my phone always flares up on a Sunday. When someone makes a horrific mistake in a pit stop, I get a whole bunch of text messages of people going, is that the last pit stop that guy's ever doing? The truth is, that's the worst decision you could make, because that guy is one of your central figures in giving feedback into why that mistake might have happened, and crucially, how you stop that mistake happening again. You're going to take that information, that feedback loop, and put in processes that mean you never have that same failure again. And if you lose the central part of that information source, that person, or the people around that failure, then you have lost one of your most valuable resources. So the people at the heart of all of these processes are the single most important factor in terms of getting the right result out the other side. Getting information, getting feedback, tapping into them as a resource, getting the ideas to come through. I said to you, Ron Dennis gave us this mandate to come up with new ways of improving these pit stops. Those ideas came from the people involved in the pit stops, as well as others around the room that we were sat in. But it started with the people at the heart of that process. And then we started to go to designers in the room and say, look, we think we've got an idea that might make pit stops better or faster. Can you design us this? And these brilliant designers came up with a solution. Manufacturing then made it. The process came together. But it came together as a result of the people at the heart of the process thinking differently to the way that we'd always thought before, tapping into this network of people that we had around us that we hadn't always tapped into in the same way before, but bringing that network together, tapping into the valuable expertise of every single one of those people transformed the way we were able to work through pit stops. I'm going to show you this video now to wrap things up, which basically shows you the fastest 3 pit stops in Formula One history. It may be no surprise as to who has the world record right now. But this process is a sign or a signal of how Formula One has developed over the years. At McLaren, we started this process, right? Because we transformed the pit stops in some of the ways that I've tried to describe. We transformed the technology, of course, as well as all those human aspects that I've described earlier on. But what that does is it raises the bar in our industry. And everyone, of course, sees what you're doing, and they do their own version of that. They get better and better as well. The standard gets raised. And we have to continually keep looking for what are often smaller and smaller gains. The process never ends. You don't get to be world champions or get the fastest pit stop in history, give yourself a pat on the back and go home. It doesn't stop there, because everyone else is continuing at that same rate. We have to do the same. Sometimes the gains are tiny, but it doesn't matter how big an advantage is for it to be an advantage. I told you we started at 4 seconds when this process began, and we're now at 1.8 seconds. Did anybody notice the difference between the fastest pit stop and the second fastest pit stop? 2/100ths of a second. Right? That's the difference between getting out of the pit lane first or second. Those are the kind of differences that can change the outcome of races and then world championships. And that process happened. The reason we got to that staggering world record of 1.8 seconds. By the way, imagine getting any group of 20 people from your office to do anything together in 1.8 seconds. It's an incredible achievement of human teamwork and elite level performance across every single aspect of an event that does not last very long. But actually that 1.8 second pit stop was months and months in the planning. It was going to forensic levels of detail in almost every single area to mitigate against failures, to prepare in the most forensic way possible, to make sure that we were better prepared than any other team who were also operating at an incredibly high standard up and down Formula One's pit lane. That's how you become world champions. And that's exactly what happened just 2 years after Lewis Hamilton came into this sport as this rookie that I told you about earlier on. He became world champion. And that giant bottle of champagne, I can tell you, was the sweetest that I've ever tasted. Not just because it was massive, but also because it represented winning the biggest prize in our sport. Now, I've described to you through pit stops how we contributed to that. But that same process of iterative development, that focus on detail, that getting feedback and including the expertise and experience of every single person in your team, bringing that as your biggest single resource and tapping into it was how we won that championship. Now, that doesn't cost any money. Formula One championships have often been won, and it's true to say this, by throwing more money at a problem than any other team. There are many championships that have been won that way. It's an expensive sport. In the past, big budgets could win you titles. That championship wasn't won that way. That championship was won by thinking differently to any other team. It was by bringing our team together better than any other team was. Operating in this trusting environment, building bonds amongst the group, something that I hope you're all doing over the course of this week. It matters and it makes a difference. And all of those tiny little improvements resulted in, as I said, the greatest prize that Formula One can offer, the Formula One World Championship, an indescribably difficult thing to achieve. And as I said a moment ago, That's not where it stops. Things don't end when you get the big prize. Everyone else is continuing at this rapid rate. If you want to be operating at the very forefront, at the highest possible levels of performance, which of course is our goal, and I hope for many of you it's your goal too, the process is continual. The smaller details matter just as much as the big ones. It's about constantly looking for even the tiniest ways that you can improve over what you did yesterday. It's about getting to know the people around your team, tapping into them as this wonderful resource. And as I said earlier on, being here this week, I hope many of you have found new colleagues, made new connections, built new bonds, so that when you do go back to wherever it is you come from, you feel like you're part of something way bigger than you did before you came. That's how we transformed a Formula One team into the most powerful Formula One team in the industry, and it's the same way that you guys can do exactly the same thing. I will leave you with another shameless plug, which is for a podcast that I do every week that talks about a lot of these kind of topics. And although I haven't got a slide yet, I can give you an exclusive that I have a second book that is going to be announced on Monday that also of the same name that covers all of these topics too. So keep an eye out for that. You can pre-order it. But for now, thank you very much indeed. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Thank you. And I think there's a microphone running around.
Yes.
If anyone wants to stick their hand up.
Thank you, Marc.
There we go.
If I stand, can you see me? So thanks for the talk. Appreciated it. One of the things I've noticed is when you've got a really, really high-performing team, oftentimes that comes along with picking some of the highest-performing individuals, and along with that comes some really big personalities. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about some of your strategies and experience navigating some of those really big personalities that come along with those high performers and integrating those so that you can achieve greater heights.
Thank you. I love the way you described it as interesting personalities, or massive egos is probably what you really wanted to say. Yeah, we get that too. And the thing that solves the problem of big egos or interesting personalities is the culture that you build within your group. And one of the things that we've identified in a Formula One team is that, as I said earlier on, the people are our single biggest resource, right? So we have to have people working together. We've built a culture at McLaren, and I know many other teams have the same sort of thing, that if someone comes along with a big personality and they do sort of rise up with an ego and feel like they're bigger than the group will police that immediately by pulling them back down to earth. And that's because of the culture that we have grown within the organization. We've done that by making sure, as I said, that everybody feels a part of this process. Because if I go way back, it used to be that the drivers were the superstars, and to the outside world, to you guys, the drivers are the superstars. To us, they're just another member of our team. They are nothing special. We can't do what we need to do without them, but they cannot do what they need to do without us. They are another member of our team. That pit stop crew, the driver's another part of that. No more important than anyone else, but just another part. And that's the culture that we've created, where everybody feels like they're contributing something to the bigger picture, to what we're trying to achieve, which is to win races and world championships. And no matter what you do in the organization, your role is crucial to that. I tried to describe to you my tiny part in my first ever Formula One pit stop. It was the tiniest component of that, but it was just as crucial as the bit that Lewis Hamilton was doing in the car and anyone else was doing around that crew. Because had I let that process down, the process falls apart. You know, we can only win when all of us win. We can only win by winning together. And that culture, if you can instill that culture, and it comes, by the way, there's no quick fix to this. You don't just turn up and say, right, this is what we want from tomorrow. It's about living it, it's about modeling it, it's about building it over time. And it really is about empowering every individual that you can, making them feel and know that they're part of something bigger. We have people in our factory who never go to a racetrack. They're building components for our cars. They might be based in the corner of a factory, maybe on a subterranean level even. Don't you see a lot of daylight, some of them? But you know, it's important to make sure that they know that that component that comes through their desk is going to end up on a Formula One car that could then shape one of the world's biggest sporting events, that people will be talking about the results of in the pub or around the water cooler at work the next week. You know, when you connect this one person sitting at a desk with a little widget on the desk to that story, it becomes way more powerful. And they feel a part of it. And I honestly believe that's how you manage this idea that no one ends up with a bigger personality or a bigger ego than anyone else, because that ego will not get you to a greater level of achievement collectively. In fact, it'll do the opposite. And when everyone knows that, it's in everyone's interest to pull them back down to earth, and it looks after itself. So that's the culture we've built. It takes time, but that's the sort of thinking behind it, and I truly believe that works.
Thank you, Mark. You talked about what works.
I can't see. Oh, there you are. Sorry.
Can you share with us what hasn't worked? You know, not personalities, but people essentially that you've decided they're an obstacle in making that process successful, and what skills in particular that makes an individual a great contributor to the team?
Yeah. It's a good question. So I've seen a number of people come into a Formula One team, and they can be brilliant engineers, they can be brilliant at whatever role they do, but they don't work in this, organizational structure. And that's because you have to be able to work well with people. The teamwork side of things and the mindset is almost more important than the skill set, the physical skill set that you bring to the role. That can easily be developed over time when you're in amongst this elite group of people that we are as a team. The mindset and this idea of learning to work with people, as goes back to the gentleman here's question about big personalities. You can't ever go into one of these organizations and think you're bigger than the rest of people, or better than other people. It just will not work. And I've seen it happen, and we've unfortunately had to let people go. Brilliant people. The highest profile example of that is anyone who is a Formula One fan and remembers 2007, back in Formula One, at my team, in fact. We had Lewis Hamilton as a complete rookie, and we had the current world champion, Fernando Alonso, as our two drivers. Now, what happened over the course of that year, it's a disastrous year. We had the best car that year, probably the two best drivers, so should have won everything and come away as world champions by the end of the season. We came away with nothing. And the biggest reason for that, there were a number, but the biggest reason is, as a team, we failed to integrate this culture that I was just talking about. We had drivers who both thought they were bigger than anyone else. Fernando Alonso, as the world champion, thought he was coming to the team and should have been the number one driver. He thought Lewis Hamilton, as a rookie, should have been this young kid learning from the master and not posing any kind of threat. But over time, very quickly, that dynamic changed because Lewis suddenly turned out to be way quicker than anyone thought. He was as quick or quicker than Fernando at times. And the relationship between the two drivers broke down as a result of that. And what happened, the consequential knock-on effect, was that the team split itself down the middle. The team of engineers and mechanics around Fernando Alonso's crew gravitated around him. The same happened on Lewis Hamilton's side of the garage. And what we had, without even realizing it, all of a sudden, was a great big team in Formula One that had split down the middle. And it's very clear, obviously, when you split a big team into two halves, you have half the power, half the potential, as if that team's working well together. And as a result, the two teams fought against each other. Internally, we destroyed ourselves and we lost the world championship. So there is a great example there in terms of not allowing, and it was our fault. The reviews and everything that we did at the end of the season identified all sorts of failures, from communication to the way we managed the situation, but the way we introduced the two drivers to each other right from the very beginning. There were so many failures. But as I said, from those failures, over the course of the winter of 2007 and into 2008, I was part of the process of leading that analysis, and we found so many things that we'd done wrong when we went into it. Over the course of that winter, we identified those, rectified many of them, and I believe it's no coincidence that just 12 months later, we became world champions with Lewis Hamilton. And it's because of the failures that happened before. So things go wrong all of the time, and as I said earlier on, it's part of the process. I don't believe we'd have become world champions in 2008 without the catastrophic failures that we had in 2007. So now, if I look back on that, I'll take 2007 because I'm happy with 2008. At the end of 2007, I thought it was awful. I thought it was the worst year ever. But actually, sometimes you have to zoom out a little bit and say, of course things are going to go wrong. The most important thing is how you react to those failures, how you deal with them, and what processes you put in place as a result of learning the feedback from them.
Marc, we're going to take one more question. And Marc's going to be hanging out at the Tech Zone during the break, so that I'm sure you can continue the dialogue with Marc. All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark. I want also to shine a light on something that positive that happened in 2007. So Lewis Hamilton, rookie, joining the team, and also stepping at the top of the podium on his rookie team right here in Montreal.
Yep.
And I want to know from you and your experience and your opinion, what are the drivers that McLaren allow to accelerate this excellence, to push that performance forward so quickly?
With Lewis, I think Lewis had an incredible talent, first of all. That was undoubtedly the case. As I said to you earlier on, when I first met Lewis, there were some signs in his own character and personality that, for me, stood out amongst all other drivers in terms of how far he was willing to push himself, what he was willing to learn. All of those things come together. So that was a big part of it. I think also, we'd been building up to 2007 with some really good incremental improvements in our car and our team anyway. So when Lewis joined the team, we should have had everything there to maximize it. And you saw signs of it. Montreal, great example, and it was an amazing day when Lewis got his first ever win. But I don't think there's ever any one big silver bullet. There's no one solution or one answer to that question. It's always lots of tiny things. And many of them are so small that they seem insignificant on their own. In the same way that improving a pit stop down to 1.8 seconds, I've told you some of the bigger things we did. There were hundreds and hundreds of tiny things that on their own don't even seem worthy of me trying to recount the story of, because they were so small. But all of those things coming together, and it was the same in the team at 2007. It was about in helping him to transition into being a Formula One driver. That was a massive change in his life, as well as driving a car. It was about trying to get the team to work together, and ultimately we did fail in that regard. But at the early part of the season, things were going reasonably well. And it was the competitive spirit in him that I think makes him stand out. The moment he had a glimmer of hope in his eyes that he could even challenge the current world champion, Fernando Alonso, you could not hold him back. And he was never going to be this young rookie that just learned from the master. The moment he saw an opportunity, that was it. He wanted to show the world that he was as quick, if not quicker. So a lot of it came from him. Of course, the team enabled him in lots of different ways, but a lot of it came from his talent combined with this incredible character and set of characteristics that I think are the same things that have gone on to make him a 7-time world champion.